On the 24th of July 1983, a geologist hunting moss rocks with his family in the Adelaide Hills walked into a clearing beside a dirt airstrip near One Tree Hill. In the long grass, he found the clothed body of a teenage boy. The boy had been dead for around 2 weeks. He had been missing for nearly 2 months. For most of that time, he had been alive, somewhere out of sight. The forensic team that worked his clothing collected 925 individual fibres. In 1983, no laboratory could read DNA off a body left in the bush. The fibres were the case. 250 of them matched the carpets, upholstery and bedding of a single house in suburban Adelaide. Just 7 matched the boy's own home. That evidence convicted one man. Police believed he had killed before and that he had not done it alone. He has never given up a name. Richard Dallas Kelvin was 15 years old, born on the 1st of December 1967. His father, Rob Kelvin, read the news on Channel 9 every night and was one of the most familiar faces on Adelaide television. The family lived in North Adelaide, a short walk from the city centre. Richard played sport, had a girlfriend, and got on with his life as an average teenager. On the evening of the 5th of June 1983, Richard had been playing football with friends in a park near his house. Around 6:15, he walked one of those friends to a bus stop on the corner of O'Connell and Marion Streets in North Adelaide. He said goodbye and headed back. The route to his front gate was a few hundred metres on quiet residential streets. Around his neck was a dog collar, a joke his friends and family knew about and one he had worn for fun for a few weeks. He never made it home. A security guard who lived on Margaret Street, around the corner from the Kelvin house, heard cries for help coming from the road outside, then car doors slamming, then a vehicle with a loud exhaust accelerating away. By the time anyone got out to look, there was nothing to see. Richard had been 60 metres from his front gate when whoever it was took him. Richard's family reported him missing that night. South Australia Police launched an immediate search. The case led the news the next day and the week after that and the week after that as well. Rob went back on air and asked the public for help. Tips came in by the hundreds. The state reward grew from $5,000 in the first 48 hours to $15,000 within a week. The Advertiser ran a full-page missing person poster on the 28th of June with Richard's school photograph filling most of the page. Most nights Rob read the news at 6 and went home to a phone that never rang. Volunteers searched parklands and nature reserves and bushland across the Adelaide Hills, sometimes shoulder to shoulder through long grass. Police chased every lead in the file and ran down dozens of phone calls from people who thought they had seen the boy somewhere. None of it brought Richard home. June ended, July began, and the case stayed exactly where it had been the night he was reported missing. The autopsy filled in the gaps in what had happened to him. 5 separate sedatives showed up in his system: Mandrax, Noctec, Amital, Valium and Rohypnol. The combination indicated sustained, deliberate sedation throughout the time he was missing, with the drugs cycled and varied across the weeks. He had been sexually assaulted repeatedly. The cause of death was massive blood loss from a large internal injury caused by a blunt object. His body had been washed afterward and redressed in his own clothes before being dumped. He was placed in the long grass beside the airstrip in a fetal position, his head forward, his arms wrapped around his knees. When the lab compared the fibres on the clothes against textiles from the Kelvin house and from the homes of everyone Richard was known to have spent time with, the match was elsewhere. Almost all of the fabric on his body had come from one private residence in a quiet Adelaide suburb. Detectives now had an address. What they did not yet have was enough to walk through the front door and make an arrest. Richard Kelvin was not the first. In the 4 years before his abduction, 4 other young men had been taken off Adelaide streets, drugged, tortured and killed. The deaths shared details so specific that investigators believed one group of people was behind all of them, working together in some loose arrangement that had been operating in the city since at least 1979. Alan Barnes was 17. On the 17th of June 1979, he was hitchhiking on Grand Junction Road in the northern suburbs when he was picked up by a white Holden HQ sedan carrying 3 or 4 people. His body turned up 6 days later near the South Para Reservoir north of the city, and the post-mortem found Noctec in his blood. He had been cleaned and put back into his clothes before being left at the water. He had died from massive blood loss from the same anal injury that killed Richard Kelvin 4 years later. Neil Muir was 25. On the 28th of August 1979, around 8 weeks after Alan Barnes, fishermen at Mutton Cove on the Port River pulled garbage bags from the water. Inside were Neil's remains dismembered into sections, with skin bearing his tattoos cut away and taken from the scene. Noctec was in his blood too. A doctor named Peter Millhouse was tried for the murder in 1980 and acquitted, and after that no one else was ever charged for the killing. Peter Stogneff was 14. He skipped school on the 27th of August 1981 and never came home. A year later, a farmer at Middlebeach found skeletal remains while burning off scrub on his property, and the body was identified as Peter's. He had been cut into 3 sections in the same way as Neil Muir. Part of the body was destroyed in the clearing fire before police got to the site, and whatever forensic evidence had been on it went with the ashes. Mark Langley was 18. He had been at a friend's birthday party on the night of the 27th of February 1982. At around 1:15 in the morning, he left in a white Datsun 1600 with 2 friends and parked on War Memorial Drive beside the River Torrens. A minor argument got him out of the car, and his friends drove around the block before coming back to pick him up. He was gone. His body turned up 9 days later off Sprigg Road at Summertown in the Adelaide Hills. A precise incision ran from his navel to his pubic region, made with a surgical instrument, and the hair around the wound had been shaved as if for an operation in a hospital. Part of his small bowel was missing. Mandrax was in his blood. 5 young men aged 14 to 25 taken off the streets of one city across 4 years. The same sedatives kept turning up in their bodies. Each had been assaulted the same way as the one before. Their bodies turned up in scrub or in water around the city's outskirts, with the post-mortem details varying from victim to victim, but the pattern unmistakable. South Australia Police saw the connections early, but connecting the cases on paper and proving them in a courtroom turned out to be 2 very different problems. The address belonged to a 37-year-old accountant who lived alone in the northeastern Adelaide suburb of Paradise. He worked at a pipeline supply company on South Road in Regency Park. He dressed conservatively, kept to himself in the office, and had no criminal record. His name was Bevan Spencer von Einem. He had been on the police radar since the 1970s. His name had come up around the earlier killings on more than one occasion, and police knew he had spent time with some of the previous victims before they died. None of those leads had ever been turned into a criminal charge against him. During the Kelvin investigation, a former associate of von Einem's came forward. He was identified in court documents as Mr. B and was later publicly named as Robert Bland. Bland had spent time in the accountant's company over several years, and what he described to police was a routine that had been running for as long as he had known the man. Von Einem drove through Adelaide late at night, working the streets and suburbs where young men hitchhiked or walked alone after dark. He would pull over, offer a lift, then hand the passenger a drink from a flask he kept in the car. The drinks were spiked with sedatives strong enough to put a grown man to sleep within minutes. Bland said he had watched it happen on numerous occasions over the years, and that the accountant had sometimes had company along for the ride. The targets, he said, all fit the same profile: alone, on foot, and either too drunk or too tired to question a free lift home. Police arrested him on the 3rd of November 1983, 4 months after Richard's body had been found at the airstrip. They searched his house in Paradise from top to bottom. They seized bottles of Mandrax, along with Noctec hidden on a ledge behind his wardrobe. Those were the sedatives that had been found in the bodies of Richard Kelvin and the 4 young men before him. He said the bottles were his, and that he used the pills to help him sleep. The trial opened on the 15th of October 1984 before Justice White in the Supreme Court of South Australia. The jury was 7 women and 5 men, sworn in for what was expected to be one of the longest criminal trials in the state's history. The prosecution's case was the fibres. They walked the jury through the lab work that had matched the textiles on the boys' clothing back to the accountant's home, carpet by carpet and fabric by fabric. Hairs matching the defendant had also been found on and inside those clothes. Mr. B took the stand and described the routine, the flask, the spiked drinks, and the nights he had ridden along. The defence challenged his credibility but could not shake the account he had given. They floated the theory that other men had abducted Richard, kept his clothing somewhere with identical fibres to the Paradise House, then dressed him again before dumping the body. The forensic scientist told the court fibres did not work that way at that volume. Secondary transfer could explain a handful of fibres on a single garment. It could not explain hundreds of them in dozens of different fabric types on every layer of clothing. The contact between the boy and that house had been direct, sustained, and recent. The jury was out for 7.5 hours before they came back with guilty. Justice White sentenced him to life imprisonment with a 24-year non-parole period. The prosecution appealed it as too lenient. On the 29th of March 1985, the Court of Criminal Appeal pushed the minimum out to 36 years, which was the longest order ever handed down in South Australia at the time. The Kelvin conviction covered one of the 5 murders. 4 others were still on the books. Families of Alan Barnes, Neil Muir, Peter Stogneff and Mark Langley had watched the trial from the outside, knowing the same man was suspected in their sons' deaths. In 1989, South Australia Police charged the convicted killer with the murders of Alan Barnes and Mark Langley. The plan was to ask the court to admit what the law called similar fact evidence. They would show a jury that the drugs, the sexual assault, the targeting of young men in public places, and the post-mortem mutilation across all 5 killings formed a signature unique to one offender. Mr. B would go back on the stand to give the same account he had given in 1984. The pre-trial hearing opened on the 19th of December 1990 before Justice Dugan, and the defence immediately challenged the admissibility of the similar fact evidence. On the 20th of December, Dugan ruled that the connections between the Kelvin case and the other 2 could not be put before a jury, and most of Mr. B's evidence was also excluded from the trial. The ruling gutted the prosecution overnight. Without the similar fact evidence, the Barnes and Langley cases came down to what was left of Mr. B's testimony, and Bland was a former associate with his own history that the defence was going to bring up in cross-examination. The Crown decided, on the advice of the Attorney General of South Australia, to drop both. On the 21st of December 1990, the Langley charge was withdrawn and the Barnes charge was dropped a short time afterwards. The families of both young men sat in a courtroom and watched the only prosecution ever brought on their son's behalf collapse on a question of admissibility. Von Einem was never tried for any of the 4 other killings. The suspicion that Von Einem had acted alone had never held up under serious scrutiny. The cutting on Mark Langley's body and Neil Muir's required medical training an accountant from Paradise did not have, and someone steady enough to do it cleanly. Whoever had picked up Alan Barnes back in 1979 had not been alone in the car. There had to be a group. The detectives gave the group a name. It came out of a 1988 television interview in which one of the lead investigators spoke about breaking up the happy family. The label stuck around the city, even though what police were describing was not a biological family at all, but a loose network. They estimated the core at roughly 12 people, with a wider circle of more than 30 known associates who had varying degrees of knowledge or involvement in the killings. Some of those people had respectable jobs in Adelaide. A few were doctors, which investigators believed explained the precision of the work that had been done to the bodies. The social standing of certain members made witnesses reluctant to come forward. Some who did talk later recanted or refused to testify. Multiple investigations ran through the 1990s and the 2000s, with different units picking the file up and putting it down again. A formal review was completed in November 2010, with DNA testing run on evidence held since the 1980s. Some of it was checked against known associates of Von Einem. The review produced no new charges. The names that had been on the file in 1984 were still on it in 2010, none of them ever charged with anything. The convicted man spent more than 4 decades behind bars. His 36-year non-parole period was eventually converted to a whole-of-life order, which meant there would be no release date and no parole hearing ever. In 2007, he was moved from Yatala Labour Prison in Adelaide to Port Augusta Prison in the far north of the state, more than 700 kilometres from the city and from the families who were still waiting for answers. He lived there in a protected unit, separated from the general population for his own safety. In 1989, from inside Yatala, he had given a single interview to a journalist from The Advertiser. He pleaded innocence on every charge and hinted he could name others if he chose, but said he feared for his life if he did. He never gave another interview. Cold case detectives went up to Port Augusta to see him over the years. Different officers in different decades worked through the file with him, one victim at a time, and asked again and again about the people they believed had been there with him on the nights of each killing. They asked who had handled the bodies afterwards. Every time, the answer was the same denial it had been in 1983. In late November 2025, von Einem was transferred from Port Augusta back to Yatala Labour Prison in Adelaide. He was dying. Terminal lung cancer combined with long-term complications from diabetes. A 7 News camera caught the ambulance arriving at the prison gates, and the story broke across South Australia within hours. The families of the 4 remaining victims knew what it meant. If he was ever going to talk about their sons, this was their last chance. South Australia Police major crime detectives went in. 2 officers spent around an hour with him in a secure room set up for the interview. They worked through the 4 names that had been on the file for decades. They asked about the network, about the people who had helped him, and about the 5 weeks Richard Kelvin had been kept inside his house in 1983. The last question was whether there was anything he wanted to put on the record before he died. He gave them nothing. The detectives walked out of the prison carrying notebooks and a small video camera. Whatever they had recorded during that hour, it did not contain a confession or a single new name. Von Einem died at Yatala on the 5th of December 2025, less than 2 weeks after the final interview. He was 79 years old and had spent 42 years in custody. He was buried without ever being asked another question about any of it. After the death, South Australian Premier Peter Malinauskas released a statement. "The killer had chosen silence," the Premier said, "callous, deliberate silence, and the decision to take critical information to the grave was, in his words, an act of cruelty in its own right." The Deputy Premier Kayam Maha put it more bluntly. Quite frankly, he told reporters, "Every day that person is not on this planet anymore is a good day. The 4 other murders remain officially unsolved. No additional charges have ever been laid against anyone in the wider group. The case files are still open. Rewards of up to $1 million per case sit on the table for anyone who can give police what von Einem would not. 925 fibres lifted from a dead boy's clothing in July 1983. 250 of them traced to one man's house in suburban Adelaide. That evidence put Bevan Spencer von Einem in prison for the rest of his life. But the 4 other young men whose bodies carried the same drugs, whose deaths followed the same pattern, whose injuries told the same story, those cases died with him in a prison infirmary on the 5th of December 2025. The fibres told a jury what happened to Richard Kelvin. Nobody could make them tell the rest. If this case stayed with you, leave your thoughts in the comments. More solved cases in the playlist.